So friends, I wonder if we all could just take a brief moment together of silence, of worship, and then we're going to just jump in and reflect a bit and ask some questions together. So, Cynthia and Mill, I shared with each of you the inspiration for this theme, who or what is it that we worship? But I'll just share with everybody. So I was on Quaker Talk, which is a subcategory of TikTok, which is a form of social media that is popular among people who are at least 10 to 15 years younger than me. And I was really moved by this young friend in Maine who was making these short explainer videos about their experiences of Quakerism. And people were coming into the comments and asking all these questions. And then this young friend was making these really lovely, insightful videos in response to all the questions. And I found it so touching to see this, this really lovely use of this medium. Thank you, Jennifer. Jennifer has dropped Rory Kennison, the friend in questions account, in the chat for anyone who is on TikTok and would like to check this out later. But I was particularly struck by noticing a couple of times people asking a question in the comments of like, I was seeing a lot of people saying like, wow, Quakerism sounds really great. Wow, I didn't know that there was like a church that could do those things or that had those kinds of open beliefs, or you don't have to believe the same thing. I'm confused. And so I saw a lot of people who were touched by that or moved by some of the ideas that Rory was sharing. But I also saw a number of people saying like, this sounds cool, but like, who are you worshiping though? Or like, what are you worshiping? And somehow that question really tickled me because I was like, I don't really know how to answer that exactly. And I kind of don't think it's the right question in a way, not like morally right or, right or wrong, but I just was like, I'm not sure it's the most useful question, or at least, it wasn't a question that made sense to me, but I could totally understand how somebody would have this question. And so, yeah, I think I would love to start by just asking you, Mill and Cynthia, about your response to this question framed as such. And I know we each talked about it a little bit preparing, but just this question of who or what is it that we're worshiping, or that you personally are worshiping. I would love to start with, how do you react to that question? And Cynthia, I see you kind of smiling, so I want to call on you first.
Well, I'm thinking of being a child and being raised in a Congregationalist church and having this idea that God was some like Santa Claus version without a red suit, that I had to, it was something out there, up there. And even to the point of wanting to sleep in my bed as close to the wall as I could so God could rest God's pinky finger on my bed, is probably the only part that would fit. But that has definitely changed over the years. And I guess I'd start by saying worship for me is not bowing down to some supreme being that demands obedience, but more a way of trying to open myself, body and soul, to a voice, to something that in my experience has helped me lead my life, has helped to guide me. So it's something that I can do in my own life at home and do, but in the company of other friends, other Quakers, other visitors, I feel much more pulled into a depth of belonging and connection to not only all the people there, but to all of creation. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And Mill, what about you?
Well, in terms of what do I worship? What do I think that Quaker groups are worshiping? My initial response is I have no clue. I find that for me that kind of puts the horse before the cart, or the cart before the horse. In that I spent years working on why am I here at a Quaker meeting, what brought me here. And while it's not a concept that's original to Quakerism, what I realized one night was that idea that for which I was seeking had caused me to seek. That for which I was seeking caused me to seek. And that what I was looking for was relief. I was looking for healing. I had grown up with in a Roman Catholic church, no offense to the Catholics out there, but in a Roman Catholic church with a broken and bleeding Jesus who blamed me all my childhood. And so we parted ways, but I never really got past the sense that there was a relationship. And so it wasn't until I, started looking at my attraction to the lack of hierarchy in Quakerism and the lack of ritual in Quakerism that I was able to sit and start to sort out and said, you know what, I'm pretty banged up. And that's when I started feeling that there was a relationship growing to something. If I could just sit still long enough, be quiet, and listen, even if I had no clue what was going on, that was better than genuflection. It was better than rote prayer. It was, so now I feel like after 25 years of doing this, that I have a relationship with Jesus, and I get it. Quakerism isn't about Jesus for everybody, and I respect that. I really appreciate that there's room for everyone. I'm surprised to find that after all these years of mine has become more of a Jesus-centered kind of Quakerism, but that to have healed that relationship to the only Son of God who died for my sins, and instead spend time with Jesus as a teacher and Jesus as a healer. And we have a joke between us. I'll sit down and say, so Jesus, tell me everything. And I'll often start my prayers like that. But I really think that in the material world, worshiping the silence, worshiping the collection, feeling the difference between large groups and small groups, and being sensitive to that, presenting myself for healing, for forgiveness, in a minimalist setting, that's what I'm sort of draw a circle around and call that worship.
Yeah, and I hear a thread, and I just want to say, Rita, I see your hand, and I will call on you in just a moment. Where we just have a couple of other things that I want to get to, and then we'll open it up for questions. But I just wanted to tell you, I see your hand of enthusiasm. So I just wanted to draw on a thread that came up in some of what each of you just shared. This, Mill, you mentioned hierarchy, or the lack of hierarchy of Quakerism as being one of the things that made it feel like that was a space that you could come to. And Cynthia, you were talking about like a shift from, a Santa Claus in the sky who you need to make room for, or, we spoke a little bit as well before about bowing. So, and this was just one of the threads that I'm hearing in both of what you're saying. I wonder if you could just speak a little bit more about this idea of what does hierarchy have to do with ideas about worship, and how have your own ideas about that changed over time?
Mill, do you want to go first?
Okay. repeat the question. I'm thinking about that when you say the I mentioned the hierarchical piece. What what I think sort of encouraged me, it encouraged me in the beginning, was the idea that there wasn't somebody in charge of telling me, that, as someone said earlier, whether I'm doing it right or wrong. Mm-hmm. That there wasn't an approved way of worshiping or a contraband way of worshiping.
I'm tickled, honestly, at the idea of what would a contraband way of worshiping be?
An absolutism, that there is no other way but whatever we say, this is the way it is.
Yeah,
and the fact that the Quakers are healthy enough that they're able to include so many people without ranking, whether you've got it right or yours is secondary.
Oh, I see. So I think if I'm
egalitarianism. Yeah.
I think if I'm hearing you right, Mel, I think I first heard what you were saying is related to the idea of like there being a hierarchy between you and God or Jesus, or your idea of the divine or spirit. But I'm also hearing you talk about like a lack of hierarchy between different ways of approaching.
Right. No, because I definitely understand the hierarchy that that the Spirit of God has dominion. It's like the business that I'm not an equal. I'm not an equal, but rather that I don't have to go through the altar boy, and then I don't have to go through the priest who has to go through the bishop and the monsignor in order to make sure I'm getting this right.
Like spirit is something larger than you, but you don't have to go through intermediaries.
Right, yeah. And then there's people I can turn to who are my equals. I can ask a question, or I can, express a concern or a pain, and have that work through that way, as opposed to the channels. So that's that lack of ritual and that lack of hierarchy is, I think, what drew me into it. And I said, this is worshipful.
And I think of God as being encompassing, as in being in all things, and as a guide, and therefore greater than me, that which is greater than me as an individual, and connects us all. But there's a wonderful theology that is called process theology that says that at every moment of our lives, God is presenting us with options, that there are options that we can take, and that God may believe, or think that there's one way that's the best way, but we don't necessarily have to choose that way. And if we don't, then at the next moment, there are more choices. So it's a guide. If I can condition myself and teach myself to listen to that inner guide, then my life will be different than if I don't, and in my experience, better. So it's not so much a bowing down to something that has power over, but that a power that is part of my life, if I can tap into that.
Something else that I've learned about in spiritual travels is what I call the concept of the good thing, which is slightly different from God, in that, well, not God being that idea of something what we do in worship that's very focused and very centered, as we do in meeting or when people do when they go to church. But then, out in the world, when I'm walking around, I look around and I often see the good thing everywhere, in the way people are acting, or in nature, and recognizing that it's my responsibility to show up for that, to be witness to that, to participate, to extend it. And that realization, those behaviors on my part, is also worship. And that's different from the quiet time, the sitting still. That's worshipful as well.
That actually raises something that I wanted to ask you both, actually, just because I know that you both have worked in like your work in the world, your professions also have a lot of spirit in them. And I'm wondering about and then I want to then go to Rita's question and open things up to the rest of the group to if you have something that is coming up in you or a question you'd like to pose. So just think your thoughts, everyone else who's here. But I wonder actually, how does what we're talking about with the sense of like, who or what are we worshiping? Does that connect to your profession, Cynthia, as a hospice chaplain and Mill as a nurse?
Yeah, definitely. And I think of it as, so what I found is that often as a hospice chaplain, I wouldn't have that much time with a patient. They might have chosen hospice only a week, a few weeks, even days before their death. But I would try very hard to do the best I could to know how I could be most helpful to them. Mm-hmm. So I would feel that I couldn't know everything that they needed, but that God must, whatever God was for them. And if I could listen and kind of pay attention, I might get hints or messages about how to best help this person. So I think of one case of a woman who was in a wheelchair and really couldn't speak very much, but I got down to her level and introduced myself, and her face kind of lit up. I told her I was a chaplain, and can be hard to explain that. So as her face lit up, I said that I often think of myself as a mirror reflecting back to people what I see. And I see such warmth and welcome in your face. And I really want to thank you for that. And she was able to haltingly say, thank you for seeing me. Mm-hmm. And I felt like she really did feel seen. So, there are many examples of things where I felt that out of the blue, I would get an image or a question that I might not have thought of that was helpful to someone. So that's one example.
Thank you.
I think in my work, that, one of the things I'm clear on is the need to sort of keep my personal beliefs, as it were, to myself. But I can live my practice. Florence Nightingale said, listen to your practice, listen to it. Mm. And so I'm very clear about there's only one thing going on, and that's the only thing that heals is God. Only God heals. Now, healing gets shared, and we can share. And I'm very clear how often in providing nursing care, I've realized that I was being healed while I was doing what I was doing. And that to be of use is a very deep value for me. To be of use is a very deep value. And so I really appreciate, I celebrate the idea that I can use my strong physical body and my education and skill set that I've developed with assessment and et cetera, and that I can bring them to a situation and just work with someone and not have to do credit stuff. Just do the work, the mechanical work that is nursing, but also know that there's another thing going on between us, and then take my hands away and walk away from it, and just and realize that that's what we can do for now. And that the outcome of that, the ripple effect, the resolution of that is out of my hands. I've done my best. And I'll see you tomorrow.
But it sounds like there's some space in there for mystery, the divine, something.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell a quick story. I was taking care of a man once who was having an extreme seizure, and we were on the floor, and I was holding his head in my hands to keep him from banging his head on the floor. And he looked at me and he said, "Thank you." And I realized right away that he can't be having a tonic-clonic seizure and be able to say thank you. And as soon as he got well, I called his neurologist. I said, "There's something deeply wrong with his treatment plan." And sure enough, they went back through it, et cetera. And they ended up changing his diagnoses and changing his medications and realized that this was not what they thought was the seizure disorder. It was something else. But it was only because he was able to say thank you that I was able to realize is that this can't be tonic-clonic seizure. He can't know what's going on right now if this is what his diagnosis is. So it's the small situations like that, or that's a large situation, but where I realized to say, aha, yeah, there was some shared healing there.
Thank you both. I have many follow-up questions that I could ask about all of this, but I would love to bring Rita up here if we may.
So I've just been exploring for a couple of months, and this thing that Quakers call worship, I've been doing a lot of YouTubing and just reading and that sort of thing on what this is all about. Now I've been to one, maybe two worship meetings via Zoom and one in person. And you know, it's taken me a little while to figure out that you speak out of the silence. I mean, I'm just used to as the world turns type thing, you know, just to ask questions if I'm seeing that other people are asking questions. And I realized about 10 minutes in that the three of you that have talked already have these little icons that I guess you're sort of a panel of speakers or something. That's what it appears. I just have to say in the worship, I feel it's way different in person than on Zoom. And, you know, personally, my very first one, I didn't know what they were doing. I thought they were all just in very deep prayer. And it was you know, I thought, well, that's a pretty cool feeling. But, you know, I'm speaking from this very newcomer place and just learning about this, you know, being these silent pauses. And I find it difficult, like especially a whole hour-long meeting. I think newcomers, you know, should be cautioned about starting out with 15 minutes because 1 hour is so hard. So this has just been my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Rita. I got to tell you, I hear you on this. And I know that at our meeting, in fact, like children in the meeting start with 15 minutes. It's maybe 10 actually. And yeah, it's really, it can be a lot. It's quite a lot of time, you know? And I think that we've sort of spoken on this panel about some of the beauty in there not being a lot of rules or even like a right or a wrong way to do worship. But I do think that some of the things you're raising, Rita, are getting at. One of the things that I find challenging sometimes is that like sometimes I have this sense of like, oh my gosh, I have to decide how I'm going to worship today. Like, couldn't someone just tell me? Like, I have to do this, you know? And it's not the same day to day. Like, I figured it out for myself last week, and I have to do that again. Like, oh my gosh, you know, it's a lot. So one, I just want to say thank you for raising that because I think that that's a real thing. It is quite a lot, and I'm curious, Mill or Cynthia, if you have any threads of what Rita raised that you would like to respond to.
Well, I think of the first time I went to meeting, unlike Rita, who was smart to do some reading and looking into it before attending meeting, someone had suggested I try it because I was looking for a new spiritual community. So I went really not knowing anything, coming from a tradition that had bulletins that told you when to pray, what to pray, when to stand up, when to sit down. I picked up a piece of paper on the way and looked at it, and it was a calendar of all kinds of events happening, but it didn't tell me when to stand up and when to sit down. So I came in and sat down and thought, okay, I'm not sure what's going to happen. But what I found was that I was able, even though a whole hour was hard, at the beginning, that I really felt this sense of coming home. And it was an in-person worship. It was quite a full meeting, Friends meeting. Cambridge has a lot of members, and at that time had 2 pretty full meetings. But I just felt such a sense of, oh, this is what happens. I really felt a presence of the divine there with me. But it took a while before it was really comfortable to sit for an hour. And there were times I'd feel groggy and be afraid I was dozing off. And but like anything, it takes practice. And now an hour feels like just the right time.
I also wonder if there is anything, thank you for those thoughts, Cynthia. And sorry, was I cutting you off, Mel? Were you about to say something?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, I'm appreciating, Amy has raised in the chat. And oh, I see we have, for anyone else who is out there YouTubing things, which I'm a big fan of Quakerism on YouTube. We'll send our playlists out with the follow-up email as well. But I would love to check out this video that Amy mentions called "I'm a Quaker, but I'm not a Christian." So just, I'll just pause before delving back into some of these things that we've raised. I think we said this at the beginning, but it's just something that I think is worth saying, that in fact, many people are Quakers, but not Christian. And that's just a thing. So for anyone who's in here wondering like, oh my gosh, am I the only one? Answer, no. And if you are a Christian and you're a Quaker or Quaker curious, are you also wondering, oh my gosh, am I the only one? Also, no. There are many flavors. But Amy is bringing up this question of like sort of pointing out that we're actually getting into 2 questions in a way of what do Quakers worship and how do Quakers worship? And in a way, I think Amy has kind of hit on the sense that you can't totally ask one question without talking about the other. At any rate, I'm not sure if I'm quite pulling together all the threads, but in my mind, there's something that Rita's raising about what it's like to be new at a Quaker meeting, and something that Amy's raising about like, what do we worship and how do we worship being really linked? And I think I'm hearing in some of the things that you've raised, Mill and Cynthia, some kind of a sense that there's a how that feels like, how do you approach worship that maybe feels more like it's giving, I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth here, but almost a sense that how is giving you more insight or direction than what. Does that seem, I might be trying to pull too many threads together at once, so feel free to take that in another direction if you want. And then I see we also have some other folks who have things they'd like to raise. But yeah, does that feel resonant to you or not?
I think
that, go ahead, Mel.
Speaking back to what Rita was talking about, I think it relates to, obviously it comes from what Rita was talking about, in that sort of the, as it were, the discipline or the structure of sitting still and being quiet. It's like, boils it down to, it's like, right now, it's just me. I have to figure out what I'm doing with my hour. I have to figure out how to worship, or what constitutes, what am I worshiping? And, what I'm clear on is that Quaker sitting is not meditation, but it's not meditation. But I learned some skills in meditation about monkey mind and about the fact that it gets really hard to concentrate, relax, and not do the treadmill in my head for the whole hour. And I do that with my breathing. And I do that with forgiving myself and saying, okay, that's monkey mind. And I pick it up and I put it to the side, say, okay, take a deep breath and start over, just sort of listen. And so that has to do with the how of worshiping for me, when some evenings are easier than others. But again, I would encourage new people to think about, if you're having trouble connecting with that hour and that quiet, think about, why do I want to do this? What brought me here? What puts me in this chair that I would even consider doing this for an hour and coming back and doing it again for another hour.
Mm.
Use that as sort of a catalyst for what is it that I'm seeking? How did I get here? And that is a lift off to realizing that for some lucky people, you have an aha moment at some point. You realize that you're not alone.
Mm. I'm realizing, even as I was trying to sort of pull together too many threads at once, that there's something emerging for me that I hear in what you're saying too, Mel, of like, I hear that for you, a question of what is it that brought me here is an important one. And I think I'm realizing that there's one for me of who's here with me, like who or what is here with me. And the answer is partly very literal, like who's physically in the room if we're in the same room together, or who's, in the Zoom room if we're here, but who else or what else is here, and there's something about feeling around for that that's part of my process, I think, and asking that question, there are some questions that, it can feel helpful to identify a question that feels fruitful to me at any given time. It may not be fruitful to you, but, and Cynthia, I think I see you maybe about to speak. And then I see your hand, Deneen, as well. And I think somebody else had their hand up as well. And I'm sorry, I missed who it was. So if you still have a thing on your mind, feel free to put your hand up again. But Cynthia, go ahead, and then I'll call on Deneen.
I was just going to say that for me, the what is different from the how, because I think many people have different ways of worshiping what the divine is to me, that it's not a different something that other people are worshiping in different ways. But the how that works for me is meeting for worship, and that it does help me to have other people present. I feel like there really is a difference, and have had the experience of another experienced Quaker sitting down next to me, and especially when I was new, feeling that I was kind of pulled into a deeper place because of that. And that as I settle myself, and once I'm calm, I will imagine myself kind of virtually reaching out to try to encompass all of the people in the room, to try to connect them, or perhaps to hold or pray for somebody that I know is having a hard time, or somebody who isn't present in the room. But the corporate worship really does feel important.
Mm-hmm. So let's see here. I see Deneen. Can we have, could we have Deneen join us? Jennifer, would you be able to bring Deneen up to the stage, if you will? Welcome, Deneen.
Hi.
What would you like to bring into this conversation?
So I'm not a typical Quaker. I grew up Greek Orthodox, and the whole liturgy was in Greek, and I don't speak Greek.
As in, it was quite literally all Greek to you.
It was literally all Greek. And when you get communion, you stick a little cloth under your chin, and the priest says in Greek, "This is your servant," and he pauses for you to say your name. And I had to say my Greek name, which is not Deneen, it's Konstantina. And I never knew when to say it. And he waits for a nanosecond, and then he goes on, because he's got, 50 parishioners to do. I thought that I was taking communion and it wasn't counting. God didn't know it was me.
Oh.
But I knew there was a God, and I was seeking. Well, when I was 20, my ex-husband left, and I was in Virginia Beach, and he took everything we owned, and he had a garage sale and savings and a car, and off he went one weekend while I was at my folks. And when I came back, I was really angry. And a friend of mine said, "Well, you need to go to Quaker meeting." And I was like, "No, I don't need to go." "Yes, you need." So I went to this Quaker meeting, knew nothing, zip about Quakers. And I was sitting in this meeting house with facing benches, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about how angry I am about this. And, what am I going to do? And And this woman popped up across the room, looked straight at me and said, before you can move forward in your life, sometimes you have to forgive. And that's a hard thing to do, but you can't go forward until you do. And sat down. I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. And I thought, oh, I think there's something going on here. I think I can understand this. I didn't go back to meeting probably for another 5 years. I moved to Albuquerque. I didn't know there was a meeting west of the Mississippi. I was totally ignorant. Meeting has saved my life, truly has saved my life. And when I sit down in meeting, I concentrate on my gratitude first. And I am not a person that sits still easily. Anybody who's been in my meeting or with me in a meeting can tell I fidget the whole time, but I make connection. And I believe, Cynthia, I believe we don't have to ask, what should I do? I've been pushed. I became a criminal psychologist. I started stealing cars at 15. I think that if we listen and open, our lives are led. The way opens and it becomes, I don't want to say easier, but possible.
Yeah.
Things become possible that you never thought would be. And so, and the last thing I want to say is, I was in Albuquerque meeting for 20 years, and there was a woman there who I adored. Her name was Marian Hogue. And she said to me one day, the only reason Quakers can worship together is we don't talk about what God is or how we work. And I think that's true to a large extent, because my way and what's going on in my head is different than yours or yours or yours. It's different, even though we're sitting together in the same room. Because I think the Spirit is that powerful. It's whatever we want. Okay, I'll get it to you. Okay, this is what you need. Okay, yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Deneen. And actually, that brings up a thread that Mill raised when he and I chatted before to prepare for this. Mill, I remember you mentioning a question of like, are you willing to leave other people alone? And I wonder if you could say a little bit about that.
Me? Him?
No, Mill.
Okay.
There's something that he shared with me that I was just hoping he could share with the group.
Well, that in my early experience of, as Deneen had said, it's everybody's quiet and everybody's still. So it's like and you can feel some things energetically, but you don't really know what's going on with other people. And again, how they worship or what they're worshiping or what's going on for them now. It won't be the same 2 nights in a row, et cetera. But it was coming out of that stillness, that physical stillness that is the meeting, and interfacing with people in the community. And it was so encouraging and so refreshing to hear that, that the idea is it was basically to leave other people alone. It's not to question their worship or question their concepts of God or assert one concept over another. It's like you look for big red herrings, like people coming into meetings with guns. You say, well, you know what? I got a problem with it. That's really not, that to that point, it's like up to sort of those sorts of limits, you leave other people alone to their worship, and not assert that superiority of one concept over the other or one practice over the other. And that's really what the Quaker practice, at least the unprogrammed Quaker practice of sitting very still and being quiet most of the time, really facilitates letting other people be on their path, and not favoring one over the other or asserting. That's what I meant. But
yeah, thank you.
It carries over. Like leave other people alone on the bus, leave other people alone in the elevator, leave other people in line at the bank. It's like this really does carry over. This helps a lot with peace of mind.
Yeah, and yet there's something about this dichotomy of like leaving other people alone, and then yet, as Deneen is saying, and yet you're in the room together. That's part of what's going on as well. There's a sense of together and also letting people alone.
And that the practice Yeah, it's important too, because and I'll stop there, but is that it's very important for me in my practice, like saying, make sure that this is what I'm also doing on the street, what I'm doing in the bus, what I'm doing in the grocery store, as opposed to, quietly thumping my chest in temple and then going out and doing, not so good stuff to my neighbor. It's like where the proof has got to be in the pudding.
Well, I think we have time for, so Deneen, I'm gonna send you metaphorically back to your chair. Thank you for popping up here to chat with us. And I think I just want to make a special invitation. We're to anyone who is new. Rita kicked us off, but I actually often will start by saying, just if there's anyone who's new or feels newish, or not sure if your question's a good question, if there's anyone for whom that applies, and there's something that's sort of burning in your mind that you want to raise for the group, you can either keep on thinking about it and take it to your breakout room and bring it back to the group afterwards. You can kind of season it a little bit with your small group if you want. Or if anybody has anything along those lines that, there's just something that it's really like burning in you to say, please feel free to throw up your hand now. And you can keep on thinking about that while I explain what's going to happen next. So, friends, this has been a very rich conversation, one that I think you saw me sort of, having some new thoughts bubbling up. And I hope that this has been a conversation that has had some new thoughts bubbling up for you, or new insights. And we're going to take a little bit of time to speak about that in smaller groups so that everybody who wants to can have a chance to speak. So Jennifer is magically making you into breakout groups right now. And while she does that, I see that Geraldine has a hand up. So 1 second, Geraldine. So we're just going to take about 15 minutes to speak in small groups of 2 or 3. If there's anyone who prefers not to be in a small group of 2 or 3, I think what we're going to do is you can actually just decline your invitation to a breakout room and stay here in the main room, where we will maintain some quiet for you to, you can take the space for worship if you want, or just silent reflection. You can write in a journal as you like. But after those 15 minutes of breakout room time are done, we're also going to come back to have a little closing time together. So I would encourage everyone to stick around so that we can have a little closing moment of worship as we close out this time together. All right, Geraldine.
Hi, so I'm pretty new, having come out of the evangelical background and no longer there, but I love Jesus very much. And I love the Quaker simplicity and how open it is. But my question is, it seems like the Quakers started with Jesus, and then in the history, it broke off, and some of them basically got absorbed into the evangelical movement. And the ones that did not still practice the silent worship. And so I guess, are there such groups that still center and focus on Jesus for worship and also do silent worship like the original Quakers? Or is it that if you want to do that, you have to join the evangelical Quakers who have services and rituals and all that stuff? But if you're with the silent groups who are continuing that tradition, it's not all focused on Jesus as much. You know what I mean?
This is a great question. And I wonder actually if Cynthia or Mill, if you have any particular insights on that. I can say some things about what I'm aware of, but you might be more aware.
Well, I believe there are some what are called conservative friends who actually are more Bible and Jesus based, as friends originally were at the beginning. And that's one area. But also within many of the meetings, there are groups who are Christian and more Jesus focused. So for instance, I haven't been able to do it for a while, but there was a group that met and we would go over the Gospels together. And it was, what did we call it? Jesus group? But
yeah, we still do. It's the Jesus group.
Yeah, it still meets. So there are those within the tradition who are Christian and for that part is very important for us. But there aren't so many meetings that, this is a Jesus-based meeting and this one is a more Unitarian-based. It's usually, I think, mixed up a lot more.
I think as well, one of the things that I remember coming up as Mel and I were talking, preparing for this, was this sense of, it's interesting how for many friends, it seems like there's something about the, or for many unprogrammed friends, I should say, that there's a sense of perhaps open-endedness about where a person might move through in their spiritual journey. I know, Mill, you were saying that when you first came to Quakerism, you were not at all expecting to become someone who was more Jesus-oriented in your Quakerism, and yet there you ended up. I wonder if there is something in this thread of people's movement through their spiritual journeys that that is relevant to Geraldine's question.
Well, I think that that Cynthia, I think, really formed the idea very well. Geraldine, it's like when you talk about meeting with people that want to worship in a Jesus-centered way, and you're sitting in a quiet meeting, and that's sort of what I referred to a minute ago about leaving other people alone. You know that there are other people in that quiet meeting who are Jesus-centered and focused, have a Christian folk, and there are people beside you who are ethical Quakers, and they don't have very much of an interest in God. But we can sit together and we can respect each other and allow for that, and be a community. But that's dappled. That's not all Jesus-centered. And Cynthia's right that usually what my experience has been is that people find the Jesus-centered people, or people that are more interested in ethics and social action. They find their way with each other outside of that hour of meeting for worship. And so that you find other Christian Quakers that want to do Bible group, or that want to do community service with a focus on the scripture, and that's where that gets met. And that's a kind of worship as well, certainly, whereas other people might be more focused on doing ethical things and working on, crime and poverty issues, et cetera, that they, but that's outside their meeting. That's really a reiteration of what Cynthia was talking about, I think. It is possible. You certainly can find a lot of satisfaction.
And there are Quakers too who are consider Jesus to be a teacher, to be a guide, and is called the inner teacher in Quakerism, but who may not see Jesus as a divine or a savior. So there's quite a spectrum too.
Yeah, I myself frankly, I don't think of Jesus in terms of the salvation. And the salvation is in the evolution. I've been saved, as it were, from the start, just by the birth canal, I was saved. And then it's through the work. But so it is, well, I feel it is a Jesus-centered religion for me. It is more about the teacher and the healer that exemplifies, and I follow that. I study his scripture very closely, and I don't really worry about the blood on the cross and that stuff.
I feel like we're having a mini divinity school here.
All of this said, I also just want to say that, Geraldine, I hope that whatever type of community and nurturing you're seeking around that you continue to reach out and look for those folks who are in your community. And I know it can be challenging sometimes geographically and things like that, but yeah, mostly I just I hear a sense of excitement in your tone of just wanting to connect on that. And I hope that is that there's a beauty and resonance in that I hope you were able to find some mirroring back and connecting around.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Bible study out there. There is.
So friends, we are now about to jump into our small groups. So any other questions that might be bubbling up? I see you, Amy, in the chat, and we can come back to these in the large group when we return. But if there are any more questions that are bubbling up, I hope you'll have a chance to talk about them.
Gail had her hand up.
Yes, and I want to go to the breakout rooms. Thank you, Susan. Okay. And I did see that, Gail. If you don't mind, Gail, I'd love to just bring whatever it is that you wanted to raise into our closing conversation. Would that be okay for you, Gail? I do not hear Gail, but
that was a yes. I nodded. I'm sorry.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So I just want to make sure that we have some time for everybody to get a chance to speak in small groups. So the query.
So a couple of things that I wanted to say, Veronica. We've got our query in the chat here. How has the concept of worship changed over time for you? Thinking about past, present, and future, what did the idea of worship mean to you earlier in your life? How has it been for you lately? And what might the idea of worship be transforming into for you? And I'm going to put people in breakout rooms. I just want to say that if I don't know who won't choose to go to their breakout room. Some people may want to stay in this larger room, have their own meditation, whatever it may be. So if you find yourself alone in a breakout room, hold tight. I'm keeping my eye on it, and I'll move you into a room with others in just a moment. So anybody who does not wish to go to a breakout room, simply just do not accept the invitation that you are about to receive. And everyone else will get moved into a room with some others in a moment. Here we go.